Hello and welcome to the TGH College Hardwood Podcast. I am Joe. With me is Greg, as always, here to recap last week of college basketball, preview this week of college basketball. Greg, how are you doing?
I'm pretty good right now. There we go. Uh, the only thing I have to say is I can't believe the NFL is trying to run a script where the game was so bad that I actually feel bad for the Chiefs now. I did not have that one in the bingo cards, but I kind of felt bad for them after the way last night went.
Wow. Okay. Feeling bad for them, but this is actually a good point to, I guess, talk about. Everyone's joining college basketball at this point, right? There's no football left. Baseball's still a little far away. I mean,
Now, there is football left.
yeah.
If you watched your commercials last night, there's football left.
Oh God, yeah. Don't get me started. Um, but yeah, the interesting thing I think is going to be seeing how people come in and get tuned to the season. We have a lot of big storylines, and I think it's going to be fun to watch how those all shake out. So, as we did last week, Greg, we have a new format, and that is to go over the top stories and then briefly go over anything else we may have missed and just kind of recap the week in more of a lightning round at that point. And that seemed to work well last week, so we're going to do the same thing this week. So, the biggest story of last week, Mike Woodson says he's stepping down at the end of the year for Indiana. And that was a little bit of a surprise in the sense that, they brought him back for this year and then he, I guess, coached it, this year, and they thought they had a pretty good roster. Maybe they could be back. I don't know. Probably not all the way, but that's now changed where they had a couple. You know, it seemed like they had a little bit of momentum going into this year, and now it's like, hey, I'm going to step down. And for Indiana, that kind of puts them back at square one, where they just really haven't had anyone. I mean, pretty much since Bob Knight, but even since Tom Crean years, where Tom Crean had a couple good years there. So, what do you make of Mike Woodson stepping down, Greg? I mean, this just seems like it's a weird timing. And while he wasn't doing the greatest, it just like, why did he come back for this year to start?
Yeah, I feel like this was inevitable unless they had a dynamite season, and you almost kind of wonder if it was just like with all the money they spent in NIL, and they got a lot of talent on that team, and they should have been a lot better, and they just have not been. They've just been really, really average, if not below average. Not the kind of season he would have needed um, to be the coach next year. I actually was talking to a coworker that's a big IU fan and basically said to me he had heard something along the lines of Woodson wanted to basically walk out after the Michigan game. So I don't know if any of this again, it's just what he told me, but and basically the thought of his I guess the administration convinced him like, hey, finish out the year. Like, again, I don't know if there's any truth to this. This is your probably your message board genius type conversation. So take it with a grain of salt. The wild thing for me is Dusty May answering more questions about the job than Mike Woodson in post game. So Joe, I know you had some feelings on that game, but it was really more because of Anthony Leal's shot. Kind of, kind of screwed you over a little bit. But
Yeah, it's meaningless points are not great, but no, I think it's fair to be frustrated with how things are going. I mean, it was definitely a bad hire from the start, and we kind of knew he was like an NBA coach, but like kind of has these old school tendencies. They have way too many bigs on the roster to kind of fit what they want to do, and that's kind of why they are where they're at right now. And that's just it sucks for Indiana fans that you can't have nice things. Um, but yeah, it's to me, it's like now where do you go? Because Dusty May didn't definitively say no, I'm not going to Indiana. I think they could make him an offer he'd consider, but he basically said I'm happy at Michigan, which is coach speak. So if you don't go him, where do you go? Everyone says the first call is to Brad Stevens.
I was about to ask you how many Brad Stevens mentions were there on your timeline this weekend.
Oh yeah. I'm dumb because I said that Kentucky should call him for their job, but Indiana they call him for their job. That he wants to be the savior of basketball in Indiana. He's going to leave the Boston Celtics GM role for Indiana instead of Kentucky. Yeah, sure. I know he's from the state, but just One phone call wouldn't kill him. They should call him, and he will tell them no quickly, just like I said he would do with the Kentucky job. And then, yeah, I think you got to kind of do a wider search. And the unique thing is we're going to have a lot of job openings for the Power Five because of people stepping down. We talked about Leonard Hamilton last week, but there's not like a ton of good mid-major coaches that have really cemented themselves very quickly. A lot of the guys got jobs last year, like Danny Sprinkle's now at Washington, and some other guys got some good jobs too. Mark Byington's now at Vanderbilt, but like, do you take a chance on a guy like Jared Calhoun at Utah State who's had a good start? Like, this is his first, like, he went from low major to mid major. Like, there's a lot to be figured out with this coaching cycle, Greg. So I don't know if you have any ideas where they'd go outside of, like, yeah, you call Brad Stevens, yeah, you call Dusty May with all their ties to the state, but that's I don't know if you're going to get someone like that just because of the market.
Yeah, I mean, just think about last year. Like we saw Scott Drew and um, whoever else turned down that. Now I'm blanking on that. But point is, we saw Kentucky job get turned down and turned down and turned down. I'm with you. Like, what makes you think you're gonna bring in a marquee name with the state of the Indiana program as it is right now? So you know, I there's just not a lot of those hot mid-major candidates. You already said that. If anything, maybe one of these guys that again just took a job last year, but we've seen it happen before where you bounce from job to job. I feel like Indiana, maybe as an administration, is going to feel like they have more pull. So, like Mark Byington might be, or Danny Sprinkle might be a good overall hire. I have to think though that they're going to believe they have more pull than that. Hey, we don't have to hire the guy that's only had 1 year of success in a power job or whatever. So I don't have a long list of names, or even I don't even have a short list of names outside of the two that we've already mentioned. One I think is not not a chance, and the other is you got to ask yourself: is he playing the get me the contract extension game, or is he actually wanting to stay at Michigan? You never know what. And he could have pretty much said anything after that game, and it didn't matter. It would be psychoanalyzed and overanalyzed or whatever. Fan bases would still be tearing through every nitty gritty word. So it's kind of a lose lose situation for Dusty. And his main concern right now really should be they got a team that's going to make the tournament, and maybe can they be good enough to do some damage. But like nothing comes to mind, man. There's nothing that jumps out at me. Do you have? Does anything gut come to your just stick out at you as well? I don't have anything.
No, I don't either, and that's the sad part is just not many coaches available. I would say the expectations have to come down. This is a like program that probably shouldn't have fired Tom Crean after what he did with getting the program as close as they have been to being back. That Cody Zeller, Victor Oladipo team was really good. Um, and like maybe you have to level your expectations of like, hey, this is not a national championship winning program right now. They're not even close. And I mean, there's a little bit to be said about the whole Big Ten being that way, but they're just not even close to being that. So let's take some baby steps here. Maybe get a good coach, and then you can go from good coach to great coach if that person can develop their own skills, or if that guy like reaches a plateau, maybe you can hire someone then. But this is like far and away going to be a tough coaching search, a tough year to do it. And with the expectations being that, like, what coach is going to leave their job to go take the Indiana job? Like, it's not like it used to be. I don't think where like Brad Underwood's at Illinois, he would take that job in Indiana because it was Indiana, right? Like, I don't think it's the same way it was back 20 years ago, where that would be the case, where Indiana was a top 5 to 10 job in the sport. It just isn't anymore. So I have no leans, I have no nothing, I have no idea where they're going to go with it, and it seems like you're the same way, Greg. So I'm excited to see who they hire, and I'm hoping they don't put too much pressure on them from the start. That's something that happens with some of these big time jobs, but yeah, definitely one of the more interesting things that has happened this season. All right, let's move on, Greg. Dickie V returns to broadcasting in the first time in almost 2 years. He has dealt with a lot of the cancer issues. He's been through the ringer. He's good to see him back. I personally want to see Dickie V at some point retire and go out with a bang. Just whatever that might be. Um, with a really cool performance where everyone's able to like enjoy his last season in a good way. He does the Duke Clemson game. We're gonna get to recapping that in a second, but I think we had to note that Dickie V coming back is good for the sport of basketball, and just wish him the best. And the I mean, how many games he has left, I don't know, but I will enjoy every one that he has left.
And Joe, I know he's not everybody's cup of tea. Not everybody likes his style, but you can say that about any broadcaster. Him coming back and beating cancer several times, and if for anybody who doesn't know, not only is he a cancer survivor, but he's huge into St. Jude and raising money for Jimmy V and all that type of stuff. So this isn't just something that affects him; it's something he's worked on for years and years and years. I did hear during some of those, the lulls in the action where they were asking him, about, I can't for the life of me now. I watched so much basketball this week. I can't remember who was calling the game with him, but they were, give him the, how you doing kind of thing. And glad to have you back. And he just got so emotional, and it's hard to not empathize with that. And as you and I are college basketball fans, like I always, it makes me think back. There's a picture of Vern Lundquist. And there was a ball that was like going out of bounds, and he like stuck his hand out to block it. But you could see the expression on his face. It was like pure joy. He might have been calling the game with Raph. And that's just kind of the way Dickie looks at this sport as well. Just, Joe, I mentioned a couple weeks back, I wish, these teams would just tell us who they are, and it would make it easier to analyze. But that's it's not college basketball. This it's crazy, it's chaotic. No matter who puts on the uniform every year, no matter what changes with who can be draft eligible, there's always stories. And Dickie V has a way of calling it that, I mean, for me, brings me in, and it really helps you immerse yourself in the game.
Definitely does. Yeah, you're right. I don't agree with a lot of his takes on Twitter. I think they're not the greatest, but I will say listening to him call a game and seeing the passion, that is great, because I think we've gotten into this point, Greg, where we have a lot of people who are covering college basketball who don't actually love the sport for whatever that may be. It's not good for the sport. Maybe it's their second or third option of what they want to be doing. Possibly they're just doing it as a job, and this is not something that they're passionate about. And that's everyone has to do that. Have their jobs that they're maybe not passionate about, but that's like having someone who's genuinely interested in the sport, wants to produce better things for the sport is good. We've seen a lot of bad coverage over the last couple of years of Goodman going after fans. That's not good for the sport. Of different, like Seth Greenberg going after different analysts if they criticize someone. It's not good. We want someone who's passionate. We want to have some rejuvenation in the sport. And while we don't necessarily want to have like a Pat McAfee for college basketball, like we've talked about for college football at different times, it is we want some life in the sport, and Dickie V brings some energy and some life to the sport. So definitely be cherishing all that he brings to the table. Now, Greg, he did do the Duke Clemson game. The Duke earlier in the week beat Syracuse, pretty expected. They covered in that one, blew them out. They lose to Clemson on Saturday. And this is notable because, at this point, we pretty much had talked about how it's, Duke and Clemson above everyone else. Duke hadn't lost in a couple months. And it's kind of crazy that, like, Clemson, who kind of sneaking under the radar, now they're 19-5 after this game. They did just lose a bad one in ACC play, but for the most part, they've been a solid team, but they're kind of sneaking under the radar. So Duke loses. Tom Knippel does the Duke player trip. I don't know if you saw that, Greg, but he tripped a guy. So that runs in the water down there. And Tyrese Proctor had a solid game, 23 points. Cooper Flagg, 18 points, but it was on 6 of 17 field goals, so it was like one of his bad games. And I think he, needs to learn that, like, to be like Anthony Davis, like, hey, it's not always that you have to shoot the ball. Sometimes it's setting up your teammates. But a lot of credit has to go to Clemson here, because I think they did a good job of getting Maluwak in foul trouble. He had 5 fouls at the end of the game, so he was out. And Victor Locken, the former Cincinnati Bearcat, 22 points, 4 rebounds. That helps you win the game. And they've made some changes for Clemson. They used to start Chauncey Wiggins. Now Locken was in the starting lineup with Ian Shefflin, and it worked out because they had the the bigs to attack Malawach, and it really changed the math and the substitutions for Duke, and they were able to get the win.
Yeah, I think if you told John Shire, hey, you guys are going to shoot 50% from behind the arc, 12 for 24, and you're not really going to turn the ball over a ton, at least not a ton more than Clemson. I have to imagine he'd take that, but they just got thrashed on the boards. 36-23 at the plus 13 advantage for Clemson. I mean that to me that's I don't know that I always look at the team stats and look for these kind of glaring things, but this is one that's a giant advantage. So I mean, good on Clemson. You had to know. I almost texted this to Joe during the week, and I didn't for whatever reason, this or that. Clemson goes into triple overtime during the week. I don't know what their game was, Tuesday or Wednesday. It was one of the games during the week. It was Tuesday. So kind of had to know this was coming. Game was at home. Everything is Duke Auburn. Clemson's already picked off Kentucky at home, which I still, even though they've had their struggles, I think still is one of the better wins in the year. I mean, this loss I think is worse than the Auburn loss that we're going to talk about in a little bit, but I don't necessarily think it's the worst. It gives you some concerns, but I'm not resetting my Duke expectations. I'm not knocking them off a tier. You can, if you disagree, I mean, speak now or forever hold your peace. But this is not changing for me. These two results that we're talking about, this one and the next one, are not monumentally changing the landscape of college basketball for me. I just don't think that in this day and age, with all the moving pieces and parts and variables that we've talked about, going undefeated in your conference is highly unlikely. It's just, you maybe could make an argument that with the way the ACC is, Duke had a much better chance to do it, but I don't think that's like it should be an expectation at this point.
No, this changes nothing. They're still going to be one seed in the tournament. They're still going to figure everything out. This is more of a, hey, do they lose a game in the tournament because of some of their issues, which is, again, maybe if you have big guys who can get them in foul trouble and change who they're going to be playing at different spots, that could be something. Can some of these guards step up in different ways? We talked about like Tyrese Proctor had a good game. Tonka Nipples up and down. Like, can Cooper Flag be more efficient? That's going to be something that's huge. And like for him, he's such a player who's so dynamic that you don't have to be the one shooting 17 field goals in a game when I think that Duke's guards probably had a bigger mismatch with some of the Clemson guards, offense, defense wise, and maybe he needed to rely on them to do a little bit more outside of Tyrese Proctor too. So that's something to consider. And again, I think we still have, I would say, not questions about Duke, but questions about how some of the pieces are going to fit together and how things are going to work down the stretch. But yeah, it's a good win for Clemson. These like you're not going to go undefeated. You're not going to have these years where that happens and it's just not realistic in college basketball anymore. 3-point line, everything. Kentucky 2012 was one of the best teams, and they lost 3 games in the season. So Duke has 3 losses now. They played a pretty decently tough schedule in the non-conference. ACC is not as what it used to be, but you still have these games that like it's hard going on the road beating Clemson too. So a lot of respect to them, and like I said, I don't think anything's changing. They're still going to be one seed as of right now. Next up, Greg, we mentioned it. We have Auburn losing to Florida, and just to kind of set the scene here, Auburn earlier in the week beats Oklahoma. Florida had beat Vanderbilt in their previous game to set up this matchup of a 6 versus 1. Florida, the 6, pulls off the upset on number 1 Auburn. This is one where, Greg, I think that we kind of saw what the recipe is if you're going to beat Auburn, which is not easy to do, but I'll explain it first. Elijah Martin out for this game. But there was significant guard play from Walter Clayton, who had 19 points, 9 assists, and 6 rebounds. Auburn had like half the team play well, half the team played pretty bad. It was kind of mixed. It's not like it usually was where some guys just play average. It was pretty much one or the other. And I think, Auburn could benefit from maybe having a go-to guy in the perimeter. maybe a little bit more. They have Pettiford, they have Miles Kelly who step up in different games to average like 11 points, but like really a go-to guy maybe could really help this team. And I think what this taught me, at least I think the recipe to beat Auburn is you might need to have a team that is built like Florida or like Texas A&M in the same way where you can play physically, you can rebound the basketball, but it's not like a star inside presence. It is guys you can just throw bodies in there and kind of battle down low. So like, Alex Condon, not going to be a star in college. He did have 17 points, not a star in college basketball, but he had 10 rebounds to go against Jai Broom. You can rotate bodies in. Chinulu was in the game for him. That's just like something you have to do. But your main focus is these guards because I mean Walter Clayton could put up some points. They were without, like I said, Elijah Martin and Will Richard didn't even have his best game, but you add in 12 points from him plus Walter Clayton's 19, and that's the game. So if I'm gonna say like not many people have a big man who can match up with Janai Broom, it's just not really logical. But if you have guys like Texas A&M does, like big guys you can rotate in and take some fouls and play some physical defense on them, that's how you're going to do it. So props to Florida. They have a really good team that's led by their guard play, but they have their big guys who play very good high energy basketball that rebound the basketball well, and they deserve this win. They're a very good team after suffering a loss last week, 2 weeks ago at this point. That's really good for them to bounce back.
So, Joe, I think that's a really good frame to put on it. If you think about their other loss, it's Duke. They maybe don't have the recipe that you're talking about, but they have a lot more talent than your average college basketball team. But if you remember, not more than a week ago, the other team that they struggled against, Tennessee, hard, tough-nosed defense. They play 8, 9, 10 deep. They have Okpara. They have Cade Phillips. They have different big guys that they can throw in there and heckle Janai Broom. And that was a 53-51 game. So I think you got something that might be, it's just because you have the recipe or the pieces doesn't mean that it's just, yeah, we got the pieces, we got the recipe, let's do it. It's still Auburn. So it's still going to be a dogfight, but they're not unbeatable. Obviously Duke beat them. That was at home. I think that's the only thing that maybe gives you a little bit of pause is, okay, no Elijah Martin, and this game is at Auburn and they lose. That gives me a little pause, but they also 14 for 23 from the free throw line. I mean, that's quite literally nine, not like 9 misses ties the game. I'm not saying you're going to shoot 100% from the free, but there's a pretty staunch difference in points right there. Those are uncontested, unguarded shots. That changes at least maybe how the game comes down towards the end. Again, no reason to go really, really in depth. We've mentioned we've got our concerns. We're still keeping Duke Auburn top tier. Maybe this just ends up being an outlier. I mean, there's literally only 2 games that Auburn has lost this year, so it's an outlier amongst their 2 losses, I guess. But it's to a good team, and it's in a conference that they have just been. I mean, it's been test after test after test after test. I guess they got an off game coming up tomorrow against Vanderbilt, but I have that on my list of games to watch because Vandy's had a couple of good wins. Then they get Bama this weekend, which is probably going to be one of the best games. I have to think I'm going to be really disappointed if that doesn't turn out to be one of the best games this year. Everything in my gut tells me it's not just going to be a high-level basketball game, but we're going to get a good 40 minutes, a good finish. I'll be sad if we don't. Either way, I saw a lot of. I was looking through ballots today. I saw a lot of ballots putting Bama as the number 1 team over Auburn. I don't agree with that, but here's your shot. Beat them this weekend. And obviously, they'll probably be number 1 next week.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see that game. We're going to pick it later, so stay tuned for that. But Yeah, I'm worried about the hype living up to that game, to be honest, just because we always hype this stuff up, and sometimes it doesn't always work out that way. But yeah, it's to me just with these two games, we have to like mention them in the top stories because these are the two teams on the top tier. That's doesn't change. They're still the two teams in the top tier. And to be honest, I just gave a framework for beating Auburn. It is very hard to have guards be as good as Walter Clayton in college basketball and have a couple of them, like Florida does, even without Elijah Martin, and then also have those guys who are those henchmen and not just one, but maybe two or three guys who can kind of rotate in at the 4 and 5 spot, match up with Janai Broom, and play physical defense. So yeah, it's a recipe that is there, but not everyone can replicate and do their own way. So I'm excited to see that Auburn Alabama game for a team that play different styles, a team that two teams that have a lot of talent. So we will keep tabs on that, make a pick here soon. Greg, next one up, we have Tom Izzo tying Bob Knight's Big Ten record for wins in the game where they beat Oregon this weekend, 86-74. Oregon was up early. Jackson Selstad had a pretty good game at 22 points. He's pretty much the only Oregon player who had a great game. No one else. I think there's one other player who had double-digit scoring. But Michigan State comes back in this one. They had that tough West Coast road trip where they lost to USC and UCLA, so this was good to get things back on the right track. Jace Richardson started in this one and had 29 points. He had been struggling with inconsistency this year, which is not too crazy since he's a freshman. But we talked about Michigan State a little bit last week, Greg, and some of our concerns with not being able to shoot the ball. But I think the first thing we have to focus on is Tom Izzo tying Bob Knight's record. What do you think about that?
I got a wild one for you. Want to guess who they play next?
Yeah, they play not in Illinois Saturday. Who do they play? Indiana.
They play Indiana at home on Tuesday.
Yeah.
To take the record. Just these weird things in sports, man. Sometimes you can't explain these things. Obviously, Bob Knight, several more national championships than Tom Izzo, but this has got to be a moment for him where he feels a certain amount of pride and whatnot. He's been a staple of the Big Ten. Obviously, he owns the last Big Ten national championship, a storyline that gets brought up every single year until whenever it's going to get done. Don't know if it's going to happen this year, but I think it's going to be probably an SEC team, but we'll see. It's I wonder how he feels, just because he's been to so many Final Fours and you're passing a legend, but there's more games than there used to be in a given year. And I like, obviously conference schedules have way expanded since then. And this is one of those cumulative stats. So I don't know if he was asked about it. I would assume he was asked about it post game. If you heard anything he said, I would just be curious what his thoughts on it were.
Did not hear anything he said about this one, but I'm sure he's very proud of the accomplishment and just shows the longevity. I think we got to a point where Michigan State kind of lost a step. They weren't the national contenders that they were for the first 10, 15 years under Izzo. And this year might be the step back in the right direction. Like, I don't know how I feel about the tournament chances long term, but the fact that they've been able to, at this point, be in the top 10, obviously they had that rough West Coast trip, but be a solid Big Ten team where they're fighting for a Big Ten championship, that's pretty cool. I mean, that's pretty awesome. Like, he's probably not an elite coach anymore, like where he's top of the sport, but that doesn't mean he's not going to get one more run in him here. So, good win for him over Oregon. Oregon's kind of fallen on their face. They're 5-8 in conference now, so not much to analyze here in terms of anything else. But for me, it's just, hey, pretty cool. He tied Bob Knight. It's something to watch out for this week. Mike Woodson just says he's going to step down to Indiana's head coaching job. We have Tom Izzo going for a record here. So even though I think I'm a little bit lesser on this week than you are with some of the games you have to watch, and I think you missed one that we'll talk about later too. I think there are some storylines. There's always storylines in college basketball and always a reason to watch. All right, so next one up, Greg, we have to talk about Milan Momcilovic coming back for Iowa State. Now, Iowa State earlier this week beats Kansas, so it's important to note that. That is without Momcilovic. So we have, to start with that, Kansas wins that one, 69-52. Without Momcilovic, this is Kansas's probably best game in months. Zeke Mayo, 17 points. It seems like things are working better when Zeke Mayo and Hunter Dickinson kind of share the ball. Maybe Dewan Harris is more of a secondary character. That's something we've talked about in a large way this whole season. Kansas plays good defense. Um, and then we get to this weekend where Iowa State had been struggling, but they bounced back and they win their game against TCU. Now, Momcilovic comes back. They move Curtis Jones back to the bench, and he had been struggling, but he ends up playing well in this one, and clearly a player who is more comfortable coming off the bench. Now, I had mentioned I don't think they're on the top tier with Duke and Auburn by themselves. But Greg, before Momcilovic got hurt, you mentioned they were. And if they are going to be in that top tier, if they are going to be national championship contenders, they need him healthy because it changes the whole dynamic of the team. When he slides in, one of the best 3-point shooters, he went 4 of 7 in this game back against TCU. He scores 14 points. But if Curtis Jones is going to lose a step because he's in the starting lineup, and then he comes out of the starting lineup, immediately gives you 24 points on a 7-11 shooting on 5 of 6 3-point shooting too, that changes everything.
Yeah, Momcilovic and Jones go 9 of 13 from the 3-point line. Actually, make all of the team's 3-pointers in the game between the two of them. This is one of those, you kind of look around the country, and I know we've had this conversation about some of these teams have that dude, that situational. I think Iowa State is a good representative of this is a team. This is a good basketball team. They don't have an elite player. I mean, look up and down. Do you think any of these guys is like a shoe-in for first team All Big 12? I mean, I think this is more of a team, and obviously they would benefit if I'm not saying you don't want an elite player on your team, but Otzelberger's working with the pieces that he's got, and it's one of those things where you almost wonder if when you're team based instead of individual based, if I don't know if it's the mojo or if it's the style, maybe losing a piece sets you back quite a bit. So they were on, what was it? Was it a 3-game losing streak after so 3-game losing streak. So they lose to Arizona on the Caleb Love shot that goes in from 70 feet, and then they go to overtime and lose. And then they have the loss to Kansas State. We'll talk about them a little bit more. And then, as you already mentioned, they lose to Kansas and only put up 52 points, and the defense didn't really show up either. They get Momcilovic back, and it's like, we're back. And here's the better news. They've got, I don't want to say a lull, but they got UCF and UC this week. I would think those are 2 games they can win, and they should be able to win easily. Getting that at a time where you're trying to work him back into the lineup is probably pretty. Obviously, if you asked Otzelberger, hey, would you rather have Momcilovic back for the TCU game or have him back for the Kansas game and not for the TCU game, he would probably say I'd rather have him for the Kansas game. But that's just not the way it worked out. They get a little time to hopefully find some rhythm, get back to where they were, ideally stay healthy. And they got Houston coming up. I think it's next week. I think it's next like Thursday. No, it's next Saturday. So that's their next like big game. They will get another shot at Arizona in the first week of March. So they got a couple of big games coming up. The key is, again, stay healthy and get everybody back into that rhythm. Get Curtis Jones. If for whatever reason he's more comfortable coming off the bench, put him there. Let him stay there, because you can't argue with 5 of 6 from the 3-point line and 24 total point. Like that, there's if it works, there's no need to change it.
Yeah, I'm with you. They are a team. They're constructed that way. It's just Curtis Jones comes out of nowhere this year. Relatively, he played well last year, but for how well he's playing. And then one guy goes down and it changes everything. Curtis Jones is the best chance of getting all Big 12 player. He's still averaging over 17 points a game. I don't know if people are going to like how bad he played in the last couple. It seemed like he started off hot in the starting lineup, and then just something went wrong, and he kind of struggled down the stretch the last couple of games. But yeah, this is crazy. And you're right; they don't really have an elite player. Like Tamin Lipsey, I thought would take a big step forward this year. He had 1 point in this game. He didn't need to score, and that's awesome that he was comfortable setting up his teammates with 5 assists. Keyshawn Gilbert, 14 points a game. He did have 8 assists in this game, which was pretty crazy. But it's not like you're looking at any of these guys and saying like that's a star. Maybe Curtis Jones is the closest thing, but he's coming off the bench, which is kind of cool. So, very well constructed team. TJ Otzelberger deserves a lot of credit for that. Getting back on the right track with the win over TCU, who was 5-6 in conference before this game, now 5-7 after that loss to Iowa State. So it's a good thing to have going here, and we'll see. Like we talked about this, Greg, too. Like there's time. Duke and Auburn are the top tier, but there's time where Iowa State gets thing right and they get healthy. There's not just who's to say in the last month plus of the season before the tournament we get Iowa State moving up into the top tier. Who's to say Houston, any of these teams, maybe Kansas figures things. I'm not going to say they're tier one, but maybe Kansas figures things out. There's so many things we don't know about these teams still, and the injuries don't make it easier on us either. All right, the last big news story this week. We have a big week for St. John's. This starts off with a win over Marquette on Tuesday, then a win over UConn on Friday. So we're gonna have to try to recap 2 games pretty quickly here, Greg. I'm gonna do my best to not go too deep into either game, but just kind of give a little bit of notes here. We have in the Marquette game, St. John's wins 70-64. Kadari Richmond is incredible. He's been incredible very so much of this whole Big East season. 18 points, 11 rebounds, 8 assists. St. John's defense, I believe, rose up to number 2 in KenPom after this game. I don't know where it sits after Saturday, but I believe that was the stat. Rick Pitino says he wants to kill himself because his whole team missed free throws. On the outside, he's trying to be encouraging. Is basically what he intimated with that. But they can't shoot, and he knows that, which makes everything even more impressive in this age of shooting. That his team is not a good shooting team, and they're doing so well. Then they move to Friday. UConn gets off to a hot start. I'm thinking okay, do they have the offense to come back in this one? The defense picks it up a notch. This is a game where UConn had $2 beer night. Liam McNeely came back. He was clearly rusty if you saw his first 5-10 minutes on the floor. But they pressed UConn. RJ Lewis had 21 points. It is a refreshing and fun team to watch at St. John's. Rick Pitino still has it. I don't know how he's done it for this long and done it so well, but he's done a very good job and deserves a lot of credit for getting this team to be where they're at, where they only have 1 loss. And Greg, I'll address something too. You sent me a quote. I'm only saying this because 15 different people texted out 15 or tweeted out 15 different quotes of after the Friday game. They asked him, "Hey, if someone told you only had 1 loss or that you only had 1 Big East loss, what would you say?" He said, "How did we lose the 1 Big East game?" Some people thought he was saying the 1 Baylor game. That's not what he was saying. But it is incredible. Yeah, if you would have told Rick Pitino, I didn't know he had this much confidence in his team after how much he hated his team last year. But if you had told him that they only had 1 loss, he's thinking, how did we get the 1 loss? Because they're that good. So props to him, Kadari Richmond. Everything that you could have asked for in a transfer. It started off a little bit slow, but he has come on extremely strong.
Yeah, I watched specifically the Marquette game early in the week, and I think I knew that they had a high rated defense, but watching them take on this Marquette team really gave me an appreciation. They, for a significant amount of time, they shut down Cam Jones. I mean, he got his points later in the game, but they are an active defense. It's not just that they're good. It's a fun style of defense to watch. Big week for them. Front runners in the Big East. Looking, dare I say, are we maybe happier as Big East fans if we're putting our Rob Lowe Big East hat on instead of the NFL hat? Are we maybe happier with the way this year has turned out with St. John's being, and this is the thing you kind of brought up, Joe, when you said people are going to be tuning into college basketball now. I don't know that they'll have an appreciation for kind of the roller coaster that some of these teams have been on between the UConns and the St. John's and stuff. They've had their ups and downs, which is weird to say because St. John's only has 3 losses on the year, but there were definitely times where we said, I don't think they're going to be what we thought they were in the preseason, and now they're okay. They're pretty good. Dare we say elite? We thought Creighton was going to be done after Pop Isaacs goes down, but they're on a tear right now. I think they've won 8 or 9 straight or something like that. So St. John's, Marquette, UConn, I mean, there's a lot to like about, and I'm sorry, in Creighton, there's a lot to like about this Big East. I would have liked it a lot more if Xavier would have won yesterday, but is what it is. But a 4-bid Big East is obviously, it's obviously better than last year, and to just put it plainly, are you happier than you thought you would be with the way this season has turned out as a Big East alum?
Yeah, yes and no. I don't think that there's a national title contender out of these. Crazy to say, but I think the list is not finite, and I think St. John's has their issues with shooting the ball, which is going to hurt them. UConn has never been consistent this whole year with or without Liam McNeely, and again, he's still rusty, so maybe he comes back and pushes them into that level. Marquette, I think in this game against UConn, Greg, I don't know you, but their or the game against St. John's, their lack of size is probably going to be an issue at some point. I love Cam Jones. I don't know if he has enough help around him size wise or anything else. Um, in Creighton, I'm impressed with how much Stephen Ashworth and Ryan Kalkbrenner have dragged that team to be how good they are. I don't know if they have enough help around them either. So I think it's good, but I think the thing that makes having less teams in the tournament like last year better is when you have a team who wins the national championship, and I don't see that happening this year. And I think you seem like you feel the same way when you talk about the SEC probably winning it too. So I would say if you can get 5 to 6 teams in the tournament, that's a good year. I'm not sure they're going to get 5 to 6. I think it's probably going to be like 4. So all right. That is our big stories. Now, Greg, we're going to go through the lightning round before we get to our picks through for the week. So, as a reminder, we'll try to do this all within a couple minutes. I'm not going to put the timer on this time because we did talk about a lot of these games already. So let's get it started, Greg. On Monday, we have Kansas beating Iowa State. We mentioned that one. That one was without Milan Momcilovic, and they lost that one, and he comes back and they look better against TCU. On Tuesday, we have Marquette and St. John's, which we already talked about. St. John's getting that big win. Rick Pitino wants to kill himself because of the missed free throws. And we have Kentucky looking very terrible against Ole Miss. They were without Lamont Butler. They were without Kirk Reese as they have been, and Andrew Carr's coming back, but not 100% in this one. They lose 98-84. That defense rearing its ugly head. So good win for Ole Miss at home in that one. Georgia Tech and Clemson is also that day. That was what we talked about earlier. I alluded to, Greg, that they lost that one in triple overtime. Clemson did, which made you scratch your head about how they beat Duke a game later. Next, or anything on those games, Greg?
Yeah, we already talked about 2 of those games. The Kentucky game with Ole Miss maybe tells me I know Kentucky's defense isn't the greatest, but I didn't think that Ole Miss had that kind of offensive performance in them. They were putting on a clinic from deep at times. There were just stretches where they were hitting outside shot after outside shot. That maybe says more about UK's perimeter defense than anything, but they go right. They get Lamont Butler back for the South Carolina game over the weekend, and they hold them to 57 points. So I think that just goes to show you how important he is to this team. The key cog in dialing up the defense and improving that efficiency for them, because that is the only sore spot we've really had with UK is we know they can play offense. We know they can get hot. We know they can shoot. I mean, they shoot 10 of 21 from behind the 3-point line in this game. You feel like you probably win most of those games, but they just did not defend well enough, and it's very hard to do it without, an all-conference type performer and definitely the best defensive player on their team. They get him back, and we'll see, but looks like they're getting on the fast track. They got a game coming up this week that we'll pick that may tell us more than the South Carolina. Well, it will tell us more than the South Carolina result, but we'll just have to see about that one.
Maybe we'll see. Lamont Butler, he comes back and they move up 20 points in Ken Palm defense, 20 spots. So it shows how important he is. Let's go to Wednesday, Greg. We have Tennessee holding off Missouri, winning 85-81. Igor Milicic had 21 points, 10 rebounds, 4 blocks. And there's a story out there about how he had the most historic night in basketball history because he shot like 80% from the floor and 75% for 3 or something. It's one of those where they cherry pick stats, but he did have a very, very nice game and helped them get the win in that one. He's been shooting the 3 a lot better, Greg, so that's something to note moving forward. He was like 25%, and now he's hitting it much better in SEC play. moving on, we have the Oregon-Michigan game. We have Michigan winning this one 80-76. We've talked about Oregon's recent struggles in the Big Ten, under 500 in the Big Ten, and have to get back on track. Rutgers beats Illinois 82-73. We know they have talent. They show some flashes. Dylan Harper had flashes in this one, 28 points, but they still have a lot of work to do before they get in the bubble talk. And Illinois maybe struggling a little bit more than we would have thought. And then the last Wednesday game, Greg, we have Arkansas and Texas. Now, Arkansas has been a team that has been on a little bit of a run, obviously starting with that Kentucky game, but they win this game. We'll talk about on Saturday. They did not win their game on Saturday to Alabama.
All right, so we'll start with the first one here. I watched this whole Missouri-Tennessee game. It was a lot of fun. I was actually really surprised to go look and see that Tennessee is only 33rd in offensive efficiency, because the actions and the way that they got Chaz Lanier and Milicic the ball and some open shots and Gainey, it was fun to watch. So I was kind of surprised. Now, I say that, but in the first half, it was one of those things where it felt like it took them a little bit to warm up, even at home. And then they came out in the second half and they just absolutely blitzed them. They put up 57 in the second half. Definitely, I don't know what the splits are in terms of how they shot in this first half versus second half, but it was better. It just felt like it. This Missouri team, also fun to watch. Maybe could use some help defensively, but Dennis Gates doing pretty well after not winning a game in the SEC last year, and now they're 6-3. And actually, I can't even remember what they did this weekend. I'm looking at their record from Wednesday night, but that team is definitely a lot better than I would have thought coming into the year. Oregon, Michigan, man, Oregon just like between that and the Michigan State loss that we talked about, they're on a downhill roll. And I think I asked you the question last week, Joe, might it turn into one of those things where they go from, ranked in the top 10 in the middle of January to not making the tournament? I have to think with the talent that they'll get enough wins to, even if it's as a first four team, I have to think they're gonna make it in. There's just a lot of talent on that team. Dana Altman's a good coach. It's not like yes, the Big Ten is better than most conferences, but I don't think it's an absolute juggernaut where I think every night they're just going to have a terrible test. And I would think they at least make the tournament. I don't know if you have a conflicting view on that. Illinois, Rutgers. I mean, it's just wild to this whole Rutgers experience with the probably 2 top 5 picks, and unless they go on some miraculous run and do some damage in the Big Ten tournament, they are probably not making the NCAA tournament. I don't know that. Even I feel like at this point, I don't know, maybe you agree, disagree. I feel like even if they won out, probably wouldn't make the bubble. I mean, maybe, but it would still be questionable if they won every game they have left. And then they go and beat this Illinois team that we both thought was pretty good and coming along. I don't know what to make of them now, because I feel like, yeah, this game's on the road, but they've just been so inconsistent lately. I don't really know what to do with them. They go on and they beat Minnesota at Minnesota over the weekend. They got a game coming up, a rematch with Michigan State. They get them at home this weekend. They lost that. That was a close game a couple weeks ago. They did lose that game when I was still unsure what to think about Michigan State. And although I don't really think my opinion has changed on them, I don't know, Joe. That's the one thing, the one riddle that I feel like I can't figure out is this Illinois thing. And yeah, they lost KJ for a little bit, but I don't know what to think of that team. I really think they're better than how they've been playing lately. But it's kind of hard to argue with these consistent losses that just keep piling up. I mean, this all started with the USC loss at home, and I don't know, man. That one didn't set off any alarm bells, but now when you look at, if you just take a snapshot of their last like 10 games, you're like, is this team really that good? I mean, I think they are, but
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you. They have not played well. I think Kasparis hasn't played well. He's struggling, and as he goes, the team goes, right? Like if they don't have him, they are a bubble team, and they're trending that way with him right now. But without him, they are a bubble team. They are not. That's high ceiling that they had is not there. So that's what it comes down to. They got to get him going again, and hopefully he's healthy and can get that figured out.
well, they got 2 home games this week between UCLA and Michigan State. Both would be decent wins to add to the resume. Then next week they get at Wisconsin and they get that non-conference matchup against Duke. So, there's opportunities left to prove that you're, a 3 and 4 seed good. I don't know what the max they can climb to at this point is, but I feel like at times I felt like they were that good. I don't know if they can get to that point, but win a couple of those games and you might be in the mix for a top 4 seed.
Still on the table for sure, and like you said, Rutgers, I think they could win out and be in the tournament. They've 4-10 in quad one games, 0-2 in quad 3 games. So there's still a lot left on the bone for them. Maybe they can add to that resume. I don't think it's going to happen though. All right, let's go to Thursday, Greg. We have Maryland and Ohio State. Ohio State wins this one. Bruce Thornton scores 31. I believe 21 are in the second half. He hits a late game winner to beat Maryland, who had 24 points and 13 rebounds from Julian Reitz. And then we go all the way to the WCC, where Greg, you wanted to point out that the St. Mary's San Francisco game. San Francisco beat St. Mary's to give them their first WCC loss of the season.
Yeah, not Miami. The Maryland game was wild. The Bruce Thornton bank in 3. That's crushing for a Maryland team that has really been, putting its stamp on the Big Ten. Had won 4 straight going into that. They do go on to beat Rutgers I think it was Saturday. I can't remember if it was yesterday or Saturday, but that's just one of those. What's the guy on Red Zone say? It's the when losses turn into wins or whatever. It was one of those. It's one of those witching hour things, man. It's just like when you have a loss like that. Like it's good for them that they were able to go on and beat Rutgers, because sometimes that kind of loss late in the game, it really kind of sets you back more than just that single game. So good for them for going on and finishing. I still do like that Maryland team. Got some really good pieces. The San Francisco St. Mary's thing is interesting because that, again, as Joe already mentioned, is St. Mary's first loss in the WCC this year. It starts to make the WCC just look that much more interesting between Gonzaga and Oregon State and San Francisco and St. Mary's. I think St. Mary's is probably the best team out of that bunch, but I think we're going to get St. Mary's and Gonzaga, but I wouldn't be surprised if all of a sudden one of these, a third team, pops out of that bunch and just kind of slips into the tournament. I don't think that's off the table. Obviously, beating St. Mary's is a step in the right direction if that's what you want to do. So that's what I got on that.
All right. Let's go to Friday. We'll just to quickly mention again that St. John's beat UConn in that one. We mentioned that already, so we're not going to go back through the whole thing again. But we'll go to Saturday, and Saturday it didn't have some storylines. Obviously, we talked about Duke and Clemson and Auburn and Florida in that one. But we also had some other games to talk about too. So, Greg, we have, Michigan State beating Michigan State beating Oregon with the Izzo stuff. Moving on, we have the Michigan-Indiana game, Greg, which you specifically put in there for the Mike Woodson game that he got so frustrated with. That's when he wanted to walk out. So that's important to note. Vanderbilt in Texas, another one that teams that I think would love to have big wins here as we're approaching the bubble talk. Vanderbilt wins that one 86-78. Moving on, we have the Kansas State game. Kansas State upsets Kansas. This is a game where Coleman Hawkins, after the game, said, "Oh, I'm 6-1 against Hunter Dickinson. Why are you guys always talking about him?" So that ignites a rivalry. We have Marquette and Creighton, Greg. That was a game that in Creighton's always tough to play, and I think we kind of maybe saw some more warts on this Marquette team and seen how good of a home court advantage that Creighton has. Florida and Auburn, we already mentioned. Texas A&M was the team that you couldn't think of that beat Missouri this weekend. Texas A&M was an underdog, was able to get the job done there. And a couple more games to go over. We're going to talk about Duke Clemson and then Texas Tech and Arizona. Arizona's on an absolute tear right now. They win 82-73, 11-1 in the Big 12. And they're getting other guys to step up and produce outside of Caleb Love, who is still not playing the most efficient basketball. But a lot of other people, most other people on Arizona are. So that's good for them.
All right. I'll try to make some of these points short. Might want to maybe talk a little bit more in depth about one or two of these, but Vanderbilt
having a great year. We already mentioned Mark Byington the last couple of weeks, looking like they should make the tournament, especially in this league,
especially with the wins they've already locked up on their resume. The Kansas State, this is one of those questions where it's like, all right, so Kansas State, it's a rivalry game, and they win it at home, and they're on a little bit of a run, but this is where you start asking yourself, like, is this more Kansas struggles, or is this more Kansas State playing better as of late? And I don't know that I'm ready to believe in Kansas State as making a push to make the tournament just yet. I would like to see them get a couple more wins before I want to even start talking about them in depth. But if anything, this just is another, to use your terminology, this just is another Kansas wart, another one of those things where it just becomes, do they have the depth to do anything this year? That was always a thing that we were worried about. And it's weird because you got more production in this game out of AJ Storr than you have in quite some time. You got, 15 from Mayo, 21 from Dickinson. DeJuan Harris doesn't really have to score for this team to be good, but it's just, I don't know, man. I think this is a team that I kept wanting to believe in, and I kept wanting to say Self will figure it out, but I might be ready to turn off the lights on them as a legitimate contender for Final Four, second weekend, whatever. I kept wanting to believe in this team, like they'll figure out their roles and they'll go somewhere with it. I don't know. Do you have any? This is the one that I wanted to talk about a little bit more because I'm just not ready to believe in Kansas State, but like I'm at wit's end with Kansas, where I thought they would be good, and I am ready to quit them. I think this is like my breaking point.
Yeah, we've already said enough about Kansas. I'm done with them. I'm not talking about them. Like, honestly, you put them on the sheet again, if it's not against one of the top 2 or 3 teams in the Big 12, I'm ripping your podcast sheet into half. So,
well,
it's cool we're talking about Kansas State beating Kansas, but in terms of whether talking about Kansas and their chances, until something changes, they're out for me. It's like one of those things where it's not like I don't fault you for putting this on the sheet because Kansas State did have a big win, and for them, 5 straight wins in Big 12 play is not easy to do, but nothing's going to get fixed for Kansas. They have talent, but we've every single week for the last 3 or 4 weeks we've talked about their issues, and nothing has changed.
Well, here's the good news, Joe. There's really nothing to talk about until their last 3 games of the year when they finish out Texas Tech, at Houston, Arizona. So that might be one of those things where I might put them on the list as like games to watch for the week when those come up. But I mean, it's going to get really rocky if they lose one of their games coming up. Colorado, Utah, BYU, Oklahoma. Like, if they lose one of those games, it's going to be panic time for Kansas fans. All right, you said we already talked about Kansas enough. Marquette Creighton, I mean, how much more can we say about the job Creighton has done without Pop Isaacs. This game's at home. Yeah, Marquette has had their issues, like we already said, but man, this isn't this is a game where Cam Jones had 27 and shot over 50% from the field, so it's not like you held down their star and that's why you beat. Like he got his own, and they still go on and they win this game, and just not something I saw coming at all. I was with you. I don't know that you said it in these exact terms, but I kind of wrote him off once Pop Isaacs. I think you maybe had a little bit more hope for him than I did, but I kind of put him on the back burner. Like I don't really need to pay attention to this team until they give me a reason to. Well, now they've given me a reason to. They popped all the way back into the top 25. Not that that's like the denominator of whether or not a team is good, but they've earned their long road back to being in national, the national spotlight. So good for them. I don't want to speak on any of the other games because the things you've already said about Texas A&M, Mizzou, and Texas Tech, Arizona, I would probably just be repeating you. So I think we can just go to picks and games to watch for next week.
I only said one sentence about each of those games, so I'm impressed if we have the same. If it's all that's you know what? Actually, good point. That's what the lightning round's supposed to be. You're right. Good.
I'm not gonna add anything if it's just me saying the same. Like, I get mad because you stole my thoughts, so I sound unoriginal. But
Well, the point of the lightning round, just to remind people listening too, is just like let you know what happened. I give a quick thought, maybe when I'm recapping the game. Greg gives a quick thought, but we would be with some of the weeks we have this year. We'd be here for multiple hours doing the show, and that's just not something.
That's an understatement.
We have the time to do. So, not every week are we going to have a 3-minute clock where we have to go down it. If I see we're going right now, we're at an hour. Last week we were at an hour and like 15 by the time we started it. The clock will come back down at different points when we need to, for sure, to keep us on track.
Joe, the only thing that's quote unquote from last week that we haven't mentioned yet that I kind of want to bring up, and I guess we could maybe talk about this when we get to picks, but Wisconsin is kind of quietly having a pretty darn good year, and that's one of those things where I can't remember how the narrative went, but there were certain times of this year where I think it was the Arizona game, we were like, oh, that's a great win, and then Arizona kind of tailed off, and you're like, oh, okay, that doesn't matter anymore, and then they lost to. They're just kind of quietly having what I would say is, I mean, if you looked at any other team that was 19-5 and ranked 16th, you'd be happy as a fan base. We've barely touched on them. Now we're going to pick one of their games coming up this week, but
you want to know why?
Why?
We want to talk about some of these Big Ten unbalanced schedules. Who's their best Big Ten win? They beat Iowa. Iowa, Rutgers, Minnesota, Ohio State, USC, Nebraska, Northwestern, Indiana, and Iowa. They've lost to Maryland, a good team. Lost to UCLA, who has some good wins. They lost to Illinois, and lost to Michigan. So, we're not talking about Wisconsin, and I don't think honestly, it's time because they're playing a big game, but I don't think they've exactly earned it. And that's just unfortunately we talked about that with the Oregon, or no, it was Michigan State, who had not played anyone in the top half of the Big Ten basically last week. So this conference expansion, that's what we get. We get these unbalanced schedules, and that's great. All right, so let's get to our picks now, Greg, and then we'll get to some games to watch as well. The first one up, we have Florida and Mississippi State. This one is on Tuesday.
I toyed with taking Mississippi State since it's at home and they have an elite player in Josh Hubbard. And generally, Mississippi State is a good defensive team. And I thought maybe that's something since Florida's coming off the struggles against Tennessee, but that Mississippi State defense is fine, but it's not Tennessee. So even though it's on the road, I'll take Florida to win this one.
Yeah, I'm going Florida too. Just the guard play, and like I said, the henchmen at big guys. These Florida, Texas A&M, Mississippi State were the teams I was higher on in SEC play than anyone else. I think pretty much if you look at consensus, everyone was high on Alabama. Everyone was pretty high on Auburn. But those teams were who I was higher on, and I'm sticking with some of these teams. And I could easily see myself picking Florida to the Final Four. If Greg's gonna give out his 20 Final Four teams last week, I'm gonna give out my 24 Final Four teams this week, and Florida would probably be one of them. Next one up, Greg, we have Tennessee and Kentucky at Rupp Arena. Kentucky did win on the road when they were banged up against Tennessee last time.
I think this is one of those things where if Lamont Butler if it was questionable for him to play or whatever, I'd be picking Tennessee, but he's back. It's at home. I'll take Kentucky.
Yeah, I really don't like this Tennessee offense, and I really don't like that they are picking up wins by Igor Milicic hitting threes because I think in long term it's going to hurt him. He's a 25% 3-point shooter. I don't think you just magically get better at throughout the season. So it's really cool they're picking up these wins. They got things a little bit back on track. But let's not remember we're like a week removed from Tennessee. Like the sky is falling, and like they've lost 3 out of their last 5 games, 3 out of the last 4 games at that point. So um, I think if you're Kentucky, you let Milicic shoot the threes. If he makes them, you live with that because he has just been such a bad 3-point shooter this year. And it's cool that he's making them these past week, but that's not going to hold up, I don't think. So with Lamont Butler back for helping with that perimeter defense, I think that helps out. Purdue and Michigan is also on Tuesday. This is probably one of the better weekday games we have. Or excuse me, I should say weekday games. One of the best weekdays of college basketball we have during the whole season. It's probably this day, Tuesday.
Yeah, there is a lot going on Tuesday, not just the games that we're picking, but the games that we're not picking. I like how far Purdue has come this year. I like how they've progressed. I will take them to win at Michigan State. I will trust in those guards and Trey Kaufman-Renn.
Said Michigan State. You mean Michigan?
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yes, I will take them to win at. I would take them to win at Michigan State too, but they're playing Michigan. I will take them to win at Michigan.
Not going against the Twin Towers. Not going against my boy Danny Wolf. Tough to match up with. I don't know who Purdue's going to throw out there. Yes, Purdue's guards are better, but Michigan being at home, I'll take them. If it was at Purdue, I'd probably take Purdue. Moving on, we have UConn and Creighton. We talked about the Big East a little bit on the show already, Greg. Who are you going with in this one?
Oh, we're just setting ourselves up for a UConn 6 seed ride to the Final Four. But Creighton's hot. I'll take Creighton.
Taking Creighton, underrated place to play on the road. Stephen Ashworth's a loadful to handle, and like I said, Liam McNeely looked really rusty in that game, Greg. I know you watched too, but he was missing everything, and like it's like solo ball kind of like hit a wall a little bit too. So it's not looking great. I'm sure Dan Hurley will get it figured out, but I'm not sure it's going to be this week, especially not on Tuesday. All right, we'll move on to Saturday. We have Wisconsin Purdue, Greg, the game that you talked about. We're talking about Wisconsin now.
Yeah, I don't think that your analysis was going to sway me, but for the record, I am picking Purdue. It was not your Wisconsin analysis. I would have picked Purdue either way, but definitely the way you framed it doesn't help the Wisconsin argument.
I could see Wisconsin winning this game, but I'm with you. I think Purdue being at home, Purdue the more proven entity, and yeah, like I think you've probably reiterated a couple times on the show. We still don't know what Purdue's ceiling is this year, to be honest. But I think beating Wisconsin at home is something that's very attainable. So I'll take them. All right, Houston to Arizona, two of the better teams in the Big 12. Both have just one Big 12 loss. So we'll see how this game shakes out and factors into the Big 12 standings, Greg.
Houston is on that list of teams that I just really like. I know to really put a stamp on their tournament resume, this is the kind of game they need. It is at Arizona. I like that defense. I will take Houston.
Taking Arizona, they're at home. I still have my doubts about Houston overall. What if that miracle ending at Kansas didn't happen? How are we viewing their season? What is their next best win? It's very, very up in the air how good this team is, and I think they're getting the benefit of the doubt due to past years rather than actual play on the court. And I love watching Houston, love their defense, but I will take Arizona at home for this one. I don't think they're some infallible team like we were talking about Duke and Auburn kind of be. So next one up, we have Auburn and Alabama. Greg, you mentioned one of the best games of the year. We have a rivalry game. We have the two top teams in the country as of right now. That's going to be fun. 4 p.m. Saturday on ESPN. Who are you going with?
I am going to have so much fun watching this game. It's going to be a lot of fun. The game's going to be on television. It's going to be played in the state of Alabama. Both teams are from Alabama. Both teams are in the SEC.
Quit stalling.
And
also, you're echoing really bad right now. So you've been echoing a little bit all show, but that was, oh boy.
I will take Auburn. I don't have a lot for you with it. I know it's at Alabama. I know we're coming off Auburn just losing this weekend. I don't know what else they have this week, but it wasn't notable enough, I don't think, for me to throw on our list of. Did I throw it on? No, I don't have it on our list of picks or games to watch. So I am going to pick them to get right whoever they play early in the week, and then go into Alabama and win that game. And I don't have a ton of bullet points for you on why. I just going with the gut there.
Going Alabama. They do shoot a lot of threes, but I do think that while it's not the same type of bodies, not the recipe I was talking about earlier, they do have a ton of bodies they can use on Johni Broome. And I think that will play a factor. And I'll take Alabama at home. I could easily see Auburn winning. I do think Auburn's a better team. But you're playing on the road in a rivalry environment. I think that's going to mean a lot in this one. Next one up, the last pick we're going to do for the night, Greg, other than a surprise one I might have at the end, we have Creighton and St. John's. This is a battle in the Big East. Talked about that enough, Greg. How's Rick Pitino going to do this one? Is he going to be mentally healthy after this one?
One thing to think about, man. We've had a monumental 2 weeks for the Big East. Just think of all of the matchups we've had in the last 2 weeks, and part of it is just because it seems like the top of the conference, their schedules just happen to run against each other at this point. But also, it's a smaller conference, so just by numbers, the top teams will play each other. It not more, but it probably closer together, since you're not dealing with 15 to 20 opponents or whatever. You're only dealing with the 11 teams that are in the Big East. So that's just another conversation to have another day. That's off-season talk, but I really like that St. John's defense. Like I said earlier, a lot of fun to watch. They're at home. The Garden is probably going to be electric. Not as electric as it would have been as if that UConn game had been at the Garden this weekend, but it was up in UConn. So I'll take them to win this game and further cement themselves as the team in the Big East going forward.
This is a possibility to be a tie in the Big East after this game if both these teams win their first games and Creighton wins this game. I'm going with St. John's too. That defense is pretty legit. I do think they'll probably lose a game down the stretch. Maybe the last game of the regular season at Marquette. I just think they don't shoot the ball well enough to be they're still very vulnerable as a team because their defense is good, but they just don't shoot the ball well. And again, that's why Rick Pitino makes the comments he does. But they have a game against UConn a little bit down the road. They have a game at Marquette. I think they'll lose some of those, but I think Madison Square Garden might be as hyped up for this college basketball game as they've been for a long, long time for St. John's. So I'm going St. John's in this one. All right, Greg, we have a list of games to watch. You want to do the same thing? I'll list it. Give me why. Okay, North Carolina, Clemson.
All right, so that game is a lot bigger for North Carolina if they want to even be mentioned in the coming weeks. Clemson obviously coming off the big win. Maybe you see a letdown from them, and North Carolina wiggles their way back into, hey, we have to mention whether or not they're going to be on the bubble. But I think Clemson wins that game. Not that we're picking it.
Yeah, I don't know why Greg put this on the list. This would be a horrible game to watch. Just awful basketball between Brad Brownell and North Carolina. And if you're watching this game, God bless your soul. You're a sicko just like us. All right, Baylor and Houston.
Baylor, lots of talent. This is a game they could really use. Houston, as we already mentioned, they have a pretty big game coming up this weekend. Definitely don't want to look past Baylor. So I just think it's Baylor needs to start racking up some wins if they want to be anything of consequence when it comes to tournament time.
Yeah, I think Houston's going to win that one fairly easily. Like you said, Baylor has some, I guess, urgency to get some wins, and they have some guys getting back. We didn't mention, but VJ Edgecombe and Langston Love, I think, are expected to play in this game, so that'll be good for them. Auburn and Vanderbilt on Tuesday. That was, as you mentioned, not in our picks, but Auburn has a tough game early in the week as well.
Yeah, it's just one of those things where
you'd think Auburn's just going to run right through them, but I don't know. Vanderbilt's been that weird. They did the weird thing to Tennessee. They're a decent team. It's at Vanderbilt. Just might be worth tuning into that game if it's close in the last 10 minutes.
Absolutely. Arizona and Kansas State.
Kansas State is trying to decide if they want to be relevant or not. Arizona is on a tear. They ain't going in, I wouldn't say complete opposite directions, but they've had really different stories to the season. This game, I would like to think, again, Arizona wins it far and away, but if you would have made me bet a large sum of money, I would have bet that Kansas would have won it at Kansas State this weekend, and that didn't happen. So this is just a sport where funny things like this happen.
We're just listing games to list games now. Okay, crazy. No, Kansas State 5-game winning streak, so they're definitely valid. Santa Clara and St. Mary's. This game's also on Tuesday.
If you really like St. Mary's, this is probably, or if you want to get a chance to watch St. Mary's, I'll put it that way. Probably a good game to watch them play. I believe it's a late time slot, and I believe it is on one of the ESPN family of networks or whatever. Santa Clara, we've already mentioned. When we went through our list of WCC teams, we were talking early in the show. We didn't mention them, but they have talent, they have potential. Maybe haven't played up to it. So this is probably still in the sicko category, but hey, if you haven't seen St. Mary's play yet this year, this would not be your worst choice to watch them play.
Definitely. This is where Greg's like, hey, I love every college basketball game. Let me list them back to back to back so everyone knows I like college basketball. As someone who picked Santa Clara, it'd be good start of the year. Don't watch this because I don't want you to see how bad my pick was, and they've been bad this year. They should Alpha Ball should have taken a huge step forward this year, and he didn't, and I'm mad. But yes, Santa Clara could pick off St. Mary's in this one. Maryland and Nebraska is on Thursday. Greg, you had that one as well.
I really like Maryland, and I am starting to hear people tell me on Twitter why Nebraska is good. I know they beat someone at home last week or the week before, so again, this is just a game that we sickos might watch, but you don't have to, I guess.
Yeah, Greg's really adapting to my feedback. All right, San Francisco and Gonzaga on Thursday. This one I actually do think has more legs than the other WCC game that you had.
Buddy, this is the kind of game that, like, if Gonzaga loses it, it's going to be all hands on deck. It's going to be DEFCON 1 or DEFCON 5, whatever the worst one is. It's going to be red alert, and that's it. And the reason it's on here is because San Francisco has been a decent program and in recent years, and they are just coming off a win last week that we briefly mentioned. So don't lose, Gonzaga, because as good as I think you guys are, regardless of what your resume says, you could get in some real trouble if you lose this game at home.
Yeah, I mean, net ranking's still high, but I don't know how much it can help you with 2-6 in quad 1 and 3-1 in quad 2, and that's all you got. So we'll see. Michigan State and Illinois is Saturday, Greg. Probably important to note the Michigan-Indiana game we said earlier is on Tuesday if you want to watch Tom Izzo break a record possibly. But if not, you might be able to watch him on Saturday break the record if Indiana pulls off an upset.
Oh, Joe, you said that you did the same thing I did. You said Michigan instead of Michigan State. So now we're partners in crime. Yep. The second time you said it. So that is a mouthful. So we'll give you that. Michiganders. I think Michiganders will forgive you. This game, I thought about putting it in our picks, but Illinois is not ranked. They've been really rocky as of late. I think I'm going to pick Illinois to win this game, but I don't know how you feel about this. I'm going to pick Illinois to win this game. You also picked Illinois to win this game. I guess technically then we're picking a top whatever team to lose to an unranked team, but situationally and context, like I don't think it's quite that. So it's not a what did you call it me for? It's not a Babe Ruth call your shot type deal. Since Illinois has been
we should mention anytime we call like a top 10 team to lose, to an unranked team, but if a team's favored, like it's not.
I
Like,
mean, it's
yeah.
it's at home, and yes, Illinois had their struggles, but Michigan State, as we've already mentioned, does not shoot the ball well outside the arc. I just think Illinois wins this game and hopefully sets their season back on the right track.
Mm-hmm. All right, and then what could be for the battle for the top of the Mountain West. We'll see how the rest of the week shakes out for them. We have the Utah State New Mexico game on Sunday.
Well, this is the one I thought you were going to yell at me for putting in here because it's two Mountain West teams.
That's not even close to the worst game on this list. It's
okay.
near the middle pack.
if you haven't watched any Mountain West basketball, this is definitely the game to tune into. It's two of the top 3 teams in the Mountain West right now. Game is definitely going to have implications for what you end up seeing in the NCAA tournament.
There you go. All right, Greg. Now the real reason I'm giving you so much shit for having all these games that we are supposed to watch. You miss a big game this week.
I'll say this. I always check and recheck, and it seems like every week I miss one at a minimum. There's something that I don't put on here.
Ranked versus ranked matchup. Mississippi State and Ole Miss. Second time in their history. Second time this year.
Oh no!
So not a game. You had UNC. You want people to watch North Carolina Clemson over watching Ole Miss Mississippi State.
Is it a Saturday? Is it a Saturday game?
It's a Saturday game.
That's why there's so many dang games on Saturday. Ugh.
That's why I was giving you so much shit. I think it's crazy that you want them to watch North Carolina Clemson over that ranked matchup. But here we are.
All right, hey, listen, it's a Monday night. There's not a lot on. I just thought, some of us like to watch basketball every day of the week.
Some of us do, yeah. I'm not going to enjoy watching that game, but yeah, I'll watch it. All right, so if you want to have a quick pick about that one, it is a ranked versus ranked matchup. We usually pick all the ranked versus ranked ones we can. I believe I had Ole Miss. I'll have to double check real quick. Yeah, I had. No, that's the earlier game. Yeah, I had Ole Miss.
You have Ole Miss.
Ole Miss because they're at home.
It's at Ole Miss. I will also take Ole Miss in that matchup because it's at home.
Yeah, I like Mississippi State, but Ole Miss being at home and being on a little bit of a roll.
I think unfortunately Mississippi State is just doomed to be like that middle of the pack SEC team. And then we're going to get into the tournament, and they're probably going to get put in a pod without an SEC team. And they're going to end up in the second weekend. Everybody's going to be like, well, how did that happen? Well, they played. None of these teams that I picked them against, I've been like, oh, man, they have no – it's just the way their schedule has worked out. It's unfortunate.
Yeah, they're a team that let's just say like right now probably like a 7 or 8 seed. I mean, obviously they're ranked – where they're ranked like 22nd. If they're like an 8 seed and they, say second round,
I'd be so mad if I was the 1 seed. I'd be so mad.
The good news is a lot of the 1 seeds are SEC teams, so they'll try to avoid putting them at an 8 seed. But I don't know how much they're gonna be able to do with the SEC just having so many teams. But I don't know. Say Houston gets the 1 seed and they have to play Mississippi State second round. Man, Josh Hubbard goes off to 31 or something like that, or Purdue moves up to number 1 seed because they're number 2 right now, according to Lenardi. Man, that's not a team you want to play. So good point on your end, Greg. They have some good, tough defensive mentality, but a guy could also kind of get free and score some. So that'd be really cool to see them possibly win a second round game against a number 1 overall seed. All right, any final thoughts for the week, Greg?
Use bad language this week. Dad's not gonna be happy with you.
I am very authentic, and that might include using some bad language. I will not apologize.
It's going to be a packed week. There's going to be a lot of basketball to watch. My wife has conferences this week, so God bless her. She's going to be having it rough, and I'm just going to be clicking through basketball games.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited for this big week. It is the week that a lot of people will start watching college basketball. They have more free time. There's no football on, so welcome everyone who is doing that. We will be kind of doing our usual show for the next couple of weeks, but we also have March coming up. We'll start giving, teams we do like to pick in March, teams we don't want to pick in March, all that good stuff. We'll have our bracket predictions and bracketologies as we get to the closer to college basketball mecca, which is March Madness. We have bracketology coming out this week on the Game House, so a lot to follow along with. Make sure you like and subscribe to the podcast and like and subscribe to the YouTube channel, the Game House YouTube channel here too. So we have a lot to talk about, but Greg, Been awesome talking basketball with you. For now, thanks for watching. We'll see everyone next time.